This is the Beyond the Story podcast, a show that goes way beyond the story.
And now, Sebastian Ross!
What's happening, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode. Hey, maybe welcome to the show because it's your first time. I'm your host, Sebastian Rusk. As always, it's great to be with you. My guest this week, the author of the Jackass Whisperer. Friends, please help me welcome to the show, Scott Stratten.
Always amazing to be introduced with that title. It's being the mayor of Jackassery myself. It's like a self-help for myself. Trying to whisper to myself to stop being a jackass. So thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure. I learned about you through I want to say it's your millennial bit that I saw on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then I read an article that you made $1 million delivering keynotes in 1 year, one calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
And I
That's
thought,
correct.
wow, one speaker would dream of that. So I thought to myself, no, first of all, I want to learn more. There are jackasses everywhere. So I'm getting a copy of this book and I must dig into it. And it was exactly what I had expected. As you saw with my post, it was right at the end of last year. So I was on a cruise with my daughter. So you said you'll enjoy the one about the cruise, of which I did too. So the timing worked out great. I am
perfect.
I'm a fellow speaker myself. Have not made $1 million speaking yet, but we run in some similar circles and have some friends in common as we often find out these days thanks to the internet. So it's great to finally be connected with you and chat it up and talk about jackasses for a second.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed the book, not because, and listen, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, well, this sounds like a book that I definitely want to read, get the audio version because Scott and his wife read it and there's all kinds of like sound effects and like you feel like it's hard to explain. Back when I was a kid, I would go to Disney World to a place, it's now Disney Studios, but it was MGM Studios at the time. And you could go into these sound booths and put headphones on and it was really dark, but it felt like the guy was like cutting your hair. Or you could like take some coconuts and bang them against like the counter and it would sound like the horses are coming. Like that's how I felt when I listened to the Jackass Whisperer. So let's back up. And when did you, we're going to start with this because this is your most recent project and then we'll kind of historically unravel things from there. But how'd you guys come up with the title and the idea to go, let's write a book about jackasses? Because when you would first read it, in fact, I showed this to a friend briefly. And he's like, yeah, but I don't know if I want to read a book that just bags on jackasses. I go, no, you don't understand. We're all jackasses. These are just case studies of us. So it was a funny conversation because it was just in passing that he was like, yeah, well, what are we going to do? Read a whole book about, bagging on jackasses? And I'm like, yeah, especially if you're one. But how did you come up with everything and how did this all become a reality?
Well, it actually all started back in, I think, 2009, 2010, and this was at the height of my Twitter supremacy. I was back then. I was, I got all those vanity designations and awards. That really high clout, score with the K, and that and $5 got me a latte. But it was I was tearing up Twitter, and I was the most influential person on Twitter pretty much in Canada. I was ranking in North America. So I was certainly onto something. And just randomly one day, I'm on the train coming back from the city, Toronto, and I just saw a random tweet, unprovoked, not a reply, and simply said, from a guy I know, like I met him at a bunch of events in Toronto, and it was a very tight-knit group back then. And he just randomly said, I just watched a 5-minute video on marketing, which is my Twitter handle, of on marketing speaking, and I didn't shoot myself in the face. Somebody should give me a cookie. And I'm like, whoa. I'm so taken aback. Now, understand too that I put especially back then, I put a big target on myself as well. I was very strong in my opinions. I still am. And I pretty much said, this is the way you should do things. So, I certainly had my share of hate and backlash and for something that's so ridiculous as something like Twitter. And I wrote back and I'm like, dude, why the hate? And he replied, it's not hate, it's just fact. Deal with it. And this is before deal with it was a meme. So, and I'm speechless at this point. And I get a bunch of DMs from people, and they're like, "You should kill them with kindness. You should win them over. When you win over your haters, they're big fans." And I wrote back, My job isn't to rehabilitate jerks online. I'm not the Jackass Whisperer." And so then I waited a couple of days, and I'm like, you know what? That's a good line. And I just tweeted it. Just in general. I didn't tweet it at a guy. I didn't want you want to think he was an inspiration for it. And I just said, "Ignore your haters. You're not the Jackass Whisperer." And it blew up. It went nuts. Like, it was my most retweeted thing, my most shared thing. And that's back then when things could go crazy on there, when you weren't a celebrity or famous. And it took off. And so we started, we started using the phrase to help promote the earlier books, which was the funny thing. So what we did, like, when the second book came out and when the third book came out, we're like, if you buy 2 copies or 3 copies, we'll send you a series of posters. And the most popular one was always "Ignore Your Haters, You're Not the Jackass Whisperer." And then we made socks, and the socks sold out. And then we had stickers made, and people were like, "Can I just get the stickers and not buy the books?" We're like, "No, well, no, this is the promo." And they just wanted they loved the phrase more than anything else. And then Brene Brown, who's a wonderful human and author and speaker, huge. She's Daring Greatly has sold, I think, 5, 6 million copies, and Oprah's best friend, and all this stuff. And she put it in Daring Greatly. She heard me say it at an event, and then she retweeted it. So, but since she is exponentially more popular than I am, it started trending with her and her name. And so she spent like all of 2011 correcting people on Twitter saying, "No, it's not my quote. I'm quoting Scott marketing." And it got to a point where when we start putting new stickers out and new posters, we start getting comments like, "Why are you ripping off Brene Brown?" We're like, What? Forget it." So it's like you spend the time defending yourself. And then some people would take it and they would make it into products, and they would put it on shirts. And somebody made like a illustration, and the majority of the illustration was the phrase. And she's putting out like a calendar or something like that, and she copyrighted it. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't go after. We've never registered like unmarketing as a trademark. We've never been those to hunt people down. I don't think we own the phrase "un," even though we have the "un" trilogy of unmarketing, unselling, and unbranding. And I've never been that person because I just think that when the best compliment to a phrase or a saying you've got is when it becomes part of the 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 consensus of the general population. When people start using it, it's just a great thing. I don't expect credit every time it's quoted, but you start selling it. And I confronted the person. I'm like, "Why would you? Like, you're not even sending me a copy. Like, that's you're not even doing that." And she said, "Oh, I searched it on Google, and it's attributed to a bunch of people, so I just figured I just attributed nobody."
I
I'm like, "Oh, okay,
just
yeah."
figured.
It's attributed to 2 people, and one of which is quoting the author. So it's been a jackassery filled ride with it, and to a point where once we and how the kind of division of labor works between Allison and I is Allison is a writer, and I'm a speaker. And so she writes the books, I do the talks, and the content is kind of a brain meld of both of us. And so after 6 kind of business books, you're kind of looking to say, okay, so what's next? And I had been keeping a running list of jackasses on my phone for a decade. Like, every time somebody pissed me off, I'm like, "Oh, you're going on the list." And I would, I would add their
Amazing.
name to the list. And so I had this giant thing in my notes, and I just sent it to Allison. I'm like, "Well, here's the types of people I thought of." She had her own list, and then we just started fleshing it out. And we realized, what it was. The whole point of the book was for fun. It was really a book about empathy and about realizing, because you sniff it in the subtitle, and the concern was what your friend's concern, which was just bagging on jackasses
Which
all day.
is a
And we didn't
great
want
time, but I don't know that
right
how sustainable,
right
right?
but we realize, we literally, our brand is known as, we call out brands for being bad to their customers. That's really what we do. We're really consumer advocates if you look at all of our work. But after a while, you realize you just keep bagging on brands and people all the time, you're part of the problem. And so he said, so how do we just 180 this? And here's the funny behind the scenes story for the title, because the title is "The Jackass Whisperer: How to Deal with the Worst People on Earth, at Work, at Home, and Online, especially when the jackass, or even when the jackass is you." And originally, I fought our publisher. We went with Page Two Publishing, their company out of Vancouver. They're a hybrid publisher, so we retain the rights when we publish with them. And originally, I'm like, the book's called Jackass Whisperer: How to Deal with Worst People at Work, at Home, and Online. And they came to me and said, we talked to the sales team and everything else, and they're like, the book is actually not literally what you were saying to me a few minutes ago, which is the book is not just bagging on jackasses. The book's about empathy. And I think they said, I think that the subtitle should reflect that. And of course, I'm like, no. The whole point is like people think we're bagging on them, but then once you finish reading it, you're like, oh, I'm also the jackass.
Right.
And then a month later, I'm talking to Alison. I'm like, we should probably make the subtitle of what they said. Like it took me like a month to admit that they're right, and which is why I'm a jackass. And so kind of we're happy with it now. And it's interesting with the audio. And I'm sorry for kind of rambling on here, but you opened up a little
Well, you're the
Pandora's
guest. I
box.
mean, you're supposed to talk.
Well, there you go. So it's the interesting thing, because we did the first 6 books with Wiley and Sons,
Only
publisher,
6.
and
That's all.
yeah. So we did the first 6 with them, and we love them. We still have a great relationship with them. But this wasn't a business book, and Wiley does business. So we went with Page Two is a group of wonderful Canadian publishing professionals that started to want to fix this model. And one of the things we did was we had to front all the costs for everything, but we retained the rights. So that audiobook you heard with all those effects and everything else, we were allowed to do all the extra things because we own the rights to it. Meaning we didn't have Audible or Amazon or publisher saying you have to read it verbatim. Because if you're not an author, if you've never done an audiobook, it's just doing a regular audiobook is the most tedious thing I have ever done. Sitting in a recording studio in a booth, reading your own words, word by word, is just monotonous it's almost like I'd rather do anything else. And if you listen to all of our audiobooks as you go through it, by the time you reach the 6th book or unbranding, by the time you get there, I record like 10% of the chapters and Alison does 90% because I'm out. I just don't want to do it. So at Jackass Whisperer, we're like, we can do whatever we want. Because you're actually very, very much shackled to the script when you're under, like Audible comes to you and says, we want you to do this. They get to call the shots. But we just recorded the whole thing and said, here, Audible, do you want it? Because in the first book, on marketing, I'm recording it and they come back with edits or updates, and you have to go back and add a couple of things in the studio. And they came back and said, in chapter 22, the book says ha ha ha, but in the audio recording, you only said ha ha. So can you go back? I'm serious about this. This is 100% true. Can you go back and record an extra ha? And I'm like, you could loop it. Like you could, you could just do like
throw an
you
extra
could be like Tiesto, or you can be a DJ and just sample that ha. And it was just so. This one was great because not only did we get to do what we wanted, but still to stay true to it. But Alice and I got to sit across from each other while recording it, and then at the end of each section with the 8 sections, we got to riff. So we read the sections, and then we just kind of said, so let's talk about this section. That's not in the printed book. We always like adding that value because audiobook listeners are just they are their own beast.
Yeah, they
are awesome. They're so into the books, just like podcast listeners, right? They're because there's I really have found there's no more intimate setting with a customer than audio. Like you're in there, like you said when you went into the booth at the MGM studios, right? It is so intimate, like this show right now. Somebody could be listening while they're jogging or on a treadmill or walking the dog or on a commute somewhere. It's just you and them.
Or dealing with a
And
jackass.
dealing with a jackass, and so you get this. We had a great opportunity, so we hired a sound designer to do those 8 stories, and then we wanted to riff, and yeah, we were very pleased with the audio, and it's a labor of love. This book was simply we did it because we wanted to do it, and people came to us in the business and the speaking business, and they're like, "You're sure you want to do this because it's a departure from your brand?" And I've spent a long time growing on marketing, and it's a killer hook to a brand for us for a very long time now. And having a departure like this seems like a big departure, but everything we've ever talked about is about dealing with corporate jackassery. So we just expanded it to everybody.
I mean, I think you eventually get to a point as a speaker where you're calling the shots now, and it's cute and everything. What agents have to say.
That's a weird thing sometimes where you start shifting from
Mother May I.
Yeah, and we need a leadership speaker or a marketing speaker or a motivational speaker we want Scott. And that's a big shift in a brand where They're like, we want Scott. Well, we can talk about what you're going to talk about, but we want the Scott experience. And that's really, as a brand and as a speaker, what you really aim for, and what I've always been aiming for.
So what is that Scott experience? And let's segue into how this whole speaking thing came about.
Well, it started. I was 12 years old, and I was sitting in our living room in the town where we still live now. And but since back then, back in in the 80s, we didn't even have a remote for the TV or anything. You had to go up and change the channel. And so what would happen is we'd just stay on the same channel for like 3 days and have a battle of laziness who didn't want to get up and change the channel. So I was sitting on the floor in the living room, and WNED Buffalo was the news program that was a PBS station across the lake from us, Lake Ontario. And they said, if you donate, $35 or whatever, if you call now, you'll get the free Les Brown VHS tape of his motivational talk. And they're like, and we'll play it for you now. And they put it on, and I was watching. I'm like, what is this? My mom was there, and I'm like, this is a thing? Like, people do this like, you can just yell at people and go home? And I always knew I was that yeah, that front man. I was always that one who I never had a problem getting on stage. I never got nervous standing up in front of the class or anything. And I realized, as you go on, most people don't have that ability. And it's not a learned or a talent. I'm missing a synapse in my brain somehow that says, crap your pants, you're about to go in front of people. And I've always been able to do it. That's how I graduated school. That's how I got out of college. I could present like no other. And I could riff, I could improvise real easy. Like when I have group projects in college, I was the worst partner to have because I would do none of the pre-work, and I'd just show up to the day of presentation and say, "What are we talking about?" And I would just kind of run the show. And so I always knew I had that talent. And you realized, okay, that's what's going to lead me to the promised land for me. And I was a lead singer of a heavy metal band in high school, and I always tell people I realized I didn't have the vocal chops to continue that as a career, so I just fired the band and stayed on stage. I don't have to split it 5 ways, anymore.
Right.
And I don't have to show up with instruments. I just show up with a USB key with a PowerPoint file on it. And so I realized that's what I was going to do. And I didn't know eventually what that final form was going to be. I just knew that speaking in front of a room, presenting was what I wanted to do. And I knew the corporate angle to that was training. Being a trainer, being a sales trainer or corporate trainer or whatever that's going to be. But I also had a huge interest in HR and human resources because I love the dynamic of humans and what HR is to attract and retain good people. That's supposed to be the creed of HR. But I was more interested in human rights and employment standards and treating people well and fairly. And so that's what I took in college. And training happened to be under HR's umbrella usually at most companies. And I had a prof that said, just be careful. I suggest you generalize first in HR, then just be a trainer right out of college, because if you do that for a few years, the only thing you're qualified to do after that is to be a trainer, because that's only where you have your experiencing. And training is the first thing to get cut. A training and development budget is the first thing to get cut in a period, like in a downturn of the economy. And it was great advice. And so I went as a generalist in HR, and I did it for a couple of years, 2 years. And then I got a job as a national sales training manager. And I flew around North America training people how to sell bubble wrap. I'm going to say that again for the listeners at home. I flew around North America training people how to sell bubble wrap. Like, if you think what you sell is hard, I taught people how to sell air, in a competitive marketplace. And so I ran 2-day training schools on this stuff. Like, I filled 16 hours of content with this, like, so I can BS with the best of them. And it got to the point where that was 2 years, and it was like my corporate career out of college was 4 years into it, and I realized I can't do this. I can't work like entrepreneur to me is Latin for bad employee, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't deal with it. And so my son was about to be born. He's 18 now. He'll be 19 this summer. And he was about to be born. And I was doing the trainer job. I was flying. I was probably gone half the month every month on the road training. I would leave on Saturdays to save the company money, because flights are cheaper on Saturdays than they are Sundays. It's called Saturday night stayover. And my son was going to be born, and I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be 40 hours a week at the office when I was at home and then on the road and gone, because I didn't need to be. I was a trainer, and I couldn't do much more at the corporate office because I trained everybody on this stuff, and there was only so many times you could, you know, update your PowerPoint, and tweak it before
Right.
you were kind of done. I was really good at looking busy, and so I went into the president's office and I said, um, "My son's going to be born soon, and I can't go on the road and be in here 40 hours a week." So I pitched him telecommuting. I pitched him kind of working from home, but also still going on the road, doing the whole thing. I've been doing great. We got, awards for our training programs, and everything was going great. And he looked at me and said, "I don't think we're prepared for this, telecommuting thing. So I'll see you Monday." And I'm like, "No, you won't." And I left. And that's the last time I worked somewhere. And it was probably the dumbest thing I ever did, and the smartest. I had like 64 cents in the bank. Like, it was not the most fiscally responsible move to do. I just knew I couldn't just keep going and going and traveling and traveling and traveling and never be home. And it's not what I wanted to do. And so I left and I started my own training company, and I got some clients very quick. And unfortunately, then it was 9/11. And so, obviously, one of the greatest catastrophes we've ever seen. In history for us, and uh, everything was gone, and it didn't matter, in the grand scheme of things. My startup training company was obviously not a big issue in the world, but for me and providing for the family, like, okay, so what do we do now? And I just started doing what I knew. I started speaking and talking, and then I had a slideshow go viral way back in the day called the Time Movie. I don't know if you ever remember seeing these slideshows online. They were just flash slideshows. They were just like stock photos with cheesy music, and
Right.
then like they were like the Dash movie and the Time movie and all these things. Well, that was us. We made the majority of those that was out there back in that time, and I'm sorry because they were rather cheesy and they worked. They just drove traffic, they built lists, and it put me right on the map for speaking. And but also we realized other speakers and authors wanted these, so I ran kind of like an agency, a pseudo agency with that for 8 9 years, and then the recession hit, and I was woefully prepared for it. I was very arrogant with the company, and I was because we were the most successful, really the most successful viral video company in the world at the time. This is back when we had to have loading screens and people were on dial-ups, and I was really arrogant about it. I did no marketing. All the business came to me. It was all word of mouth, until a recession hits, and then nobody is in the market for a $10,000 slideshow. And so I had negative revenue. Like 2009, I had negative. Like I was in the red, and it was terrible. And I had to declare bankruptcy, and it was just a brutal thing. And I joined Twitter, and I said, "Huh, what's this thing?" And I realized, maybe there's something here, but I kind of wrote it off. It's one of those marketing guys where it's like, I don't like it, so it's useless. And then I said, okay, all I have is time now. I had no business, I had no money. And I said, but I had a vision and I had a belief. And I knew that the marketing theory, the marketing practice, which was not being a jackass to people, not just bullying them into buying, but building relationships. And I started seeing the ecosystem of the internet turning towards social media, and connectivity was important. So I said, all right, I'm going to go back and try Twitter again and live on it for 30 days. And it was January 2009. And I was at 1,200 followers at the time. I said, okay. And I lived on Twitter. I mean, from waking up till going to sleep, I was going to eat, live, sleep, breathe Twitter. And I tweeted 7,000 times that month. And now the majority of those were replies. It was just connecting. It wasn't me just spouting off 7,000 statements of stuff. It was connecting with people. And I went from 1,200 followers to 10,000 in that month. And I realized, all right, I got something here. And to be one of the people that was an earlier adopter of it and then caught the wave, it was amazing because that then made noise, which then when you make noise in an industry, people start coming knocking on your door. And I knew that to get the speaking gigs I wanted to start building, that was I needed a book. I knew that was a great way to open the door to a lot of potential events and getting noticed, because to get gigs, you need to do gigs and speaking. Right? That's the number one
Yeah.
way to get gigs, right? People need to see you speaking, because the number one, two, three, four, five, and six reason for speaking is I saw you speak somewhere else. I wanted to bring that to my company or my association. And so Wiley, the publisher came calling, and I got a phone call, and I still remember the parking lot I was in when I got it, and it was Shannon Vargo, who's still our editor there at Wiley today, and she's like, "Hey, we've heard a lot about you, and we're wondering why haven't you written a book yet?" And I said, "Because I was waiting for you to offer me a book deal." And she's like, "Touche." And I would get a book deal offer. Of course, they didn't know it, but that the advance for that was just like it saved me. And I'm like, okay, so if I'm going to write a book called Unmarketing, Stop Marketing, Start Engaging, I need to have a proof of concept here. And this book will be my proof of concept. If the book does well, then my tactics do well. And that's really what it is. Any sales and marketing book to me is if it didn't sell, then one of the parts of that is you might not know how to sell as well as you think you do if you're writing a sales book. It's a great contradiction. And so I realized, okay, June 2010, I was about to go onto Twitter, and the book was coming out that fall. So I put up one tweet, and I said, the unbook is coming out. Everything was on, right? Everything is still kind of on for us, but the unbook comes out in the fall. I'm doing the unbook tour. And I called it that, not just for branding reasons, but because I had researched for years about authors and successful authors. And it was about what they wouldn't do again if they had their book was coming out. And one of the biggest things was they wouldn't do a book tour at bookstores and stuff, because all it is you sitting at a table and nobody coming up to you, and then somebody asking you where the bathroom is or where Harry Potter is and all that type of stuff. So I realized, okay, but I could do a book speaking tour. So I decided, okay, so I sent out a tweet. A book comes out in September. Let me know if your city wants an unbooked tour stop. The criteria was pre-order 100 books, fly me there and put me up. Now, the reason why you had to fly me there and put me up is I had no money. I had a prepaid credit card. I had nothing. I was just flat broke. But I had a belief that it would work, and I had built up a strong network. And that one tweet ended up getting me a 30-city unbooked tour that fall, all separately. Not like one person said, "Hey, I'll do this for you." It was 30 separate people in 30 cities saying, "Hey, can you come speak at our social media club Dallas event in September? Hey, can you come speak to just come to my town?" And half of the people that booked it had never run their own event before in their lives. They just wanted to be part of this tour, and we're going to figure it out. And then I did it, 30 cities in 10 weeks. And that nearly killed me because people were like, "Oh, you're like a band, you're on tour." I'm like, no, bands have a logical geographic order to how they tour. And I didn't. I went from Detroit to Portland to Orlando to the Yukon to it was just all over the place. And I spoke 30 times in 10 weeks, which got me the gigs to get me the gigs. And I honestly, this is as honest as I can be, I have not stopped speaking since then. And that's 2010.
I was going to say,
now we're here now.
I was going to say, what day was that? So I find so many similarities with our story, and how, there's the common denominator of, going from where we don't want to be to where we want to be. Because in 2008, I lived in Southern California, and I did marketing for mortgage companies in 2008. Right. And I had a tremendous amount of success.
That's a tough time.
Yeah,
but tough time when it hits 2008. Yeah,
right. Yeah, it got a little crazy. Plus, I was 25, so I was by default I was an asshole. So you know what I mean. So 2008 rolled around, and there was nobody to sell mortgage marketing services to because the banks stopped lending. And because the banks stopped lending, there were no mortgage brokers, let alone mortgage bankers. So I found myself at the end of my rope, everything getting taken away and the whole nine. So I decided to sell everything on Craigslist, grab my daughter, and hop on a one-way ticket back home to South Florida, to Miami. And that's exactly what I did. And I spent 2 years from 2008 to 2010 sucking my thumb in pity of, oh, woe me, what happened. And then in 2010, I woke up and said, I've got to do something. I can't continue to just do nothing. That's not what life is all about. I've been in the social media space, screwing around on MySpace. I need to do something. Maybe I can start teaching people about social media. So I came up with a name and started running around town on my skateboard and telling people I was going to start the best social media company ever. And I did. I've refined that model to come to my networking event and then come back tomorrow. I'm going to do a boot camp. And then at the boot camp, you're going to ask me questions. I'm going to fire hose you with information. And then you're going to say, hey, maybe you can manage my Twitter account for me. So I kind of fell into this whole idea. And the next thing I know, I'm at an NSA conference and tough crowd. And did I say that?
It's speakers speaking to speakers, man.
I'm never going to get a CSP ever at all. I'll never forget the first one I went to. That was when I got the book deal. I did something similar too with a hybrid outfit. But the first year that I was there, I called NSA and I go, hey, listen, I wear bow ties. I create content. I'm a good guy to let in the door and run around like media. Like, I don't even know if you guys invite media. They're like, well, we do, but I get it. Nobody ever shows up. Well, I'll show up. It was in Philadelphia that year. And I showed up and I met my publisher, Advantage Media. And they were a sponsor there, and a guy named Adam Whitty owns the place. I don't know if you know are familiar with the outfit, but he said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, Adam, I think about it every day. In fact, I've written out the table of contents in like the first page of the first chapter. But I think it's safe to say that, most people would rather wake up in the morning and eat their pillow than write another page of a book. And that's kind of where I'm at. I just space with it. And he goes, what if you could just talk, just speak the book? I go, listen, I can talk until next Sunday. Okay, starting right now. He goes, well, I only need 8 hours from you. I'll assign you to an editing team. And next thing you know, we'll have a 33,000 paid word book. And I said, let's do it. The only caveat was that it was $25,000. So I was like, I barely made it to Philly. And so I looked at him and I said, so what are you guys doing with social media with your publishing company? They're like, we haven't done anything. We didn't even have a Facebook page set up. And I said, well, listen, it was $25,000 to do the book. And I'm like, well, look how that worked out. It's $2,000 a month for me to create a strategy for you and have my team help you flush out content and create it, et cetera. And he goes, let's do a deal. So I literally bartered my first book. And that led to, they came to the table with a speaking opportunity right out of the gates when the book dropped. So that was great and everything. And the momentum was there as a speaker. And I'm like, I totally got this. And I had met Gary Vee a few years back in 2010, like right when I first got started. And I was really following that path. I'm like, gosh, this is great. Like, write a book, get booked to speak, then you'll be in demand. Next thing you know, it'll be like, first it's Sebastian, and then after that, Gary's coming up. And like, I had this whole delusional outlook in my mind about how it was all going to work out. And then I started to get involved with NSA. And then I went back for a second year and I thought, I don't know why I'm at a National Speakers Association conference. Tough crowd was the first thing that came to mind. But I said, I know that I need to be here because maybe, just maybe, even though these are my peers, it's a slightly older generation. So maybe they want to better understand what they can do with their digital game, and I can drum up some business there. I don't think anybody's there going to go, hey, great bow tie, maybe I'll book you with my next event too. It just doesn't. There's a small circle of speakers that will refer other speakers, but I don't know how to get in that club. But I found that kind of fizzles out as the hype of the book fizzles out. My book was sucks was my like angle. Like yours is mine. Social media sucks. Podcasts suck. If you're like, what do you mean you have a podcast? I know podcasts suck if you don't have one. So let's talk about that for a second. So you write a book, and do you have to keep writing books and like find an agent and like have it continue to snowball? Because mine speaking, I got to a point, Scott, where I just got fed up with the speaking business, fed up with, we don't have budgets. It's great exposure. Get yourself here. It's going to be a great stage. And I finally got to a point where I thought, you know what? Do you like free shit? I said to one promoter, I go, do you like free shit? Because if you do, then maybe we can figure it out together. But I highly doubt, like, can I call you and ask you to work for free? And I could never get an answer from that. So I decided one day that I was going to be a keynote speaker. If I called and I got booked to speak, great. I love the stage. But I'm now going to be an event MC because there's not a lot of MCs out there. A lot of speakers are MCs, but I got the bow tie. I got the energy. I come running in like a bat out of hell. And I know for a fact that there's not a doubt in my mind that I was put on this planet to be an MC. So I've been trying to carve that out ever since the fizz of the first book started. And again, now another hurdle is, well, we don't need an MC. We've got Bill from accounting. He does great with the holiday announcements at the party, But what advice could you give? Because I get asked a lot, Sebastian, how do I get booked more to speak? And I say, well, speak more, just like you had said there. So how does this all kind of from a successful speaker and having a really, blaze your own trail and had success with it? What's your advice to the individuals still trying to figure it out?
Well, it's certainly a fascinating field. That's the best word I can give it. That there's no one way, first of all. So, it's not a cop-out answer because I will give you full answers here.
Is it luck too?
So everything in business I've learned is boils down to success in business boils down to this: luck, timing, skill, effort. Okay. And it's a combination of those four things. And sometimes it's a little more luck than anything. Sometimes it's a little more skill. And for me, you can look at all those things. So it's luck and timing are pretty much, very close to the same thing. But it's, when I got on Twitter, it was just the perfect apex point to get on there and be known as an expert in it in 2009 and 2008 when I first got on there. And so that was a huge luck timing. And then skill is, look, I was destined to do this since I was 12. So I had the skill to it. I've been polishing it and honing it for years before that time came. And so I already had a lot of reps in when I decided this is going to be my career. I'd already spoken hundreds of times when I decided I'm going to be a speaker, like as a full thing. And that was versus people who are like, I like the idea of speaking. I've done it a few times at a few events for free, or because I work for a company, so they pay travel and that T&E, right, travel and expenses. And um, but I already had hundreds of reps already in, and that's a big thing. It's a craft, right? It's a performance, and so the more gigs you do, the better you get at those gigs. So I had already been polished by that point, but my goal with speaking was a very simple one: was to never pitch. I never pitched myself to speak, because when you pitch yourself now, mind you, this is a position of privilege. This is not something like I'm saying, don't pitch to speak because then you lose your leverage. Well, if your goal is to speak and you're not getting gigs yet, then you got to go out and find them. Like that's the whole thing. It's you do have to start looking for them and pitch because one thing about speaking is it's not fast. It's not quick. If you decide today, I'm going to be a speaker as my living, okay, well, you might start making money in a year from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, or you might not. You can price yourself at any price you want, but pricing is just a fairy tale until somebody pays it. And I know people who are a $10,000 speaker who's never been paid more than $1,000, but their rack rate is 10,000. And I think that the books are hugely important. Do you have to have books to be a speaker and be a successful speaker? Well, no, but it makes it easier for people to book you, because what happens is until you have that brand that has an awareness, which is, instead of a marketing speaker, we want Scott. You need something to wedge open that door. And events love authors. They love new books because then they get to say, you might not know this person, but here's their book. And that gives a legitimacy to it, which is why Alison has written this many books in a 10-year span. Like I don't know many people that put out 6, 7, 8 books in 10 years. It's a lot.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
a lot of each of those books, except for Jackass. The books are a lot of words, and like she's written over 250,000 words in these books, and so I have that asset where I'm not the one sitting there, because that's not my craft. And I early on I decided that I wanted to better my strengths and outsource my weaknesses. And I never have been one to improve my weaknesses. I didn't want to be a better administrative person for my business. I didn't want to. So what I did was, one thing I hated with speaking is, well, two things. One, I hated pitching, and then also the rejection you would get. But I also hated naming my price. I still can't name my price. I have a mental block. I think it's ridiculous, but the market bears whatever you put out there if they pay it. So I hired an assistant, my coordinator of awesome, Karen, who is still with me. She's been 16 years, has been the coordinator of awesome for the company. And she handles all the incoming stuff. So all the emails and all the phone calls go through her. And so I don't have to see a few things. I don't have to see when they say, hey, can Scott come speak? And she goes back and quotes them, and they write back and say, that's an obscene amount of money. We were thinking a bagel, and maybe a juice box, like maybe that way. But he'd have to buy his conference pass. Like I hated those things.
Yeah.
And then I also don't. My biggest problem is I just want to speak. So if I'm answering them and I came back with a number and they came back and said, how about $6? I'd be like, sure. And they're like, cool, you're going to pay us $6. And I'd be like, okay, because I just want to speak. Speaking is my dream. Speaking validates me. It fills my ego, and I love being on stage. I just had a gig 2 days ago, and it's literally the most professional fulfillment I can get in my life. I have hit my dream, and I don't want to go anywhere else with it. Like people say, so what's next? I hit that $1 million a year, and they're like, so and they kind of put their arm up in an upwards arrow, saying, what's next? And I just kind of smack their arm down and make it
Yeah.
flat. I'm like, this. I just want this. I don't have an endless pursuit of more in my DNA. it's I have an endless pursuit of enough. Do we have enough? Do we have enough for our family? Do we have enough? Like, I'm sitting right now talking to you in our front room, in the house that we bought from what we had built in
Wow.
the business. And you sit here and you just like, I, I look like an idiot every day, man. I'm telling you, I smile like an idiot every day at home because I'm living my dream. And I think a lot of times is that we don't stop and appreciate our previous self. We don't stop and appreciate where we've come from a lot. Where I sit here and I just feel content. And that's the perfect word for it. That no matter what's coming, no matter what's happening, and we're getting a huge thing happening with the industry with coronavirus and events canceling and all that stuff, and everybody's kind of panicking. And I'm just sitting here smiling like an idiot. Like, I'm one of the few people on earth get to say I'm living my dream and realizing it in the moment instead of saying, okay, so are we going to get a bigger house? Are we going to get a better car? Are we going to do this? I'm just so damn happy
Well,
to
that
be
that
where I
cycle
am.
never ends if you allow it to continue. I mean,
Right.
I've been building this for. I just celebrated 10 years 2 weeks ago from going from riding my skateboard around town and no money to I just opened a podcast studio, which is a fancy word for renting an executive suite for $500 a month and totally tricking it out with fake brick walls. And I got artwork, and I'm really, really proud of the spot. I don't know what the hell we're going to do
Congrats.
here, but I'm really, I mean, again, where did I work prior to that? But it's, again, if you don't reach a point where, you know what, life's pretty good right now, and I've worked pretty hard to,
Right.
and you reach a plateau where you're constantly refining your craft and becoming better. I think it's far more valuable to become a better human than it is to become a better business or
I agree.
or a better
I
brand.
agree. We have in our front hallway beside me here, we have a framed poster from a company called Sevenly, an apparel company online, and it's a poster. All it says is, "You don't need a reason to help someone." And like that is our creed, our mantra here. And it's just like, what can we do now to help to do things to and still run a business,
Sure.
and you can have a profitable business, you can have a good business by and still be a good person.
Yeah.
And that's why that is the foundation of unmarketing, honestly, is you don't have to be an asshole to be successful. That's really how I started on marketing. Was I'm tired of pricks
Yeah.
blowing down your door and knocking on my door at dinner and cold calling, and like it's just, I'm like, there's a better way. If people
Sure.
if we really truly believe that people do business with people they know, like, and trust, then why aren't we doing everything towards that? If we believe that business is built on relationships, then make building them your business. That's one of the first lines I had created for the book for on marketing. And one of the nice things about being an author, when you have a Kindle version, is you can go into Kindle and see what gets highlighted the most from your readers.
Oh yeah.
And the number one line was, if you believe business is built on relationships, make building them your business. And it just shows me that there's a world out there, there's a people out there who realize I don't have to beat everybody up to try to, it's not like I have to step on somebody to climb up one rung on the ladder.
Right. So back to my NSA days, that was 2014, I think 2013, 2014. I had met Jay Bear wrote the forward for my book, and Jay, I would
Oh,
put
yeah.
Jay in a similar category as you and
Love Jay.
Scott McCain. And
Oh, and Scott, love the two of my favorite people
yeah,
right there.
man.
Yeah.
I just went right to the top. I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. There's 2,000 people here in bad suits and dimples. And I listen, I don't know where the hell to start. So I started with, I went right to the top. But Scott McCain got great hair. I already knew Jay Bear. He was already a buddy of mine that I met through the social media world. And what was one other dude, Mark Sanborn. And I like, you guys been doing this since God spoke to Moses. So can I help?
Yeah, you went to the top, man. Well done.
Yeah, right to the, and then Bruce Turkel is a Miami guy, so I had automatically known him. In the second year that I was there, he blew the roof off the place, getting everybody to play a kazoo and humming to the Beatles. So like only Bruce Turkel can do. So I quickly gravitated to those guys and said, hey, I'm new to the game, but I'm really good at what I do pertaining to social media. And I want to pursue my career in becoming a speaker. Jay had always said, listen, since it's tough to get booked as an MC and a speaker, why don't you just offer a hybrid? Hey, listen, I'll MC the thing and I'll do a breakout session. So I've been trying to go through all these different scenarios of like Scooby-Doo endings on how I can get booked full-time as an MC. And I continue to come up empty. Same thing with speaking, because it's so competitive, and the fact that no one wants to pay until you're actually an established speaker. Like I've had one conversation with a speaker agent ever. Like they do not like people that are not speakers within their agency. I like at all. Like they don't even want to acknowledge existence, has been my experience. But I never really gravitated trying to try and find an agent or like an agency because it's
A
not.
bureau, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, super
exactly.
bureaus.
What Jay told me a couple years ago, it's like he's like it's not all of my business. I don't just like get book solid from an agency. Like there are other opportunities come about from there. But so I guess my question to you would be: so if I like you and I hopped in an Uber together and we're on our way somewhere and you told me what you did and I'm like, no crap, I'm an MC, this, that, and the other. Like, man, I'm
Yeah,
trying to figure this
yeah.
all out. Like, what advice would you give me in the back of an Uber, like randomly, as far
Well,
as
a
getting?
couple of things. One with bureaus. Well, first, with Jay and I I always say we came up together, and like his book, first book is coming out at the same time. My book was coming out. We started doing the speaking thing. We hit it off real good. He's just a salt of the earth dude. I
It
love
really
Jay.
is.
And but we also both pivoted out of speaking about social media at around the same time. I remember texting him because my whole thing is you kind of try to fit your topics into what they're kind of looking for, especially when you're starting out. And so the social media in the book tour, it all took off, and the marketing was based, it's almost straight up social media only when I first came out. And a few years, I think it was 2014 or so, 2015, I texted Jay and I'm like, hey man, I think I'm going to get out of the social media speaking stuff towards more about disruption and stuff. And the only thing he wrote back was run, because he was seeing it too,
Yeah,
because what happens in the kind of the life cycle of a topic when it's very topic specific. So let's take social media from years ago, or
sure.
let's say millennials and that type of topic where they have a peak kind of thing when they're just temperamental topics. So like leadership as itself is not necessarily a topic, it's based on something within leadership. And so I was seeing that social media was shifting then from keynotes into breakouts. It was becoming commonplace. People were all, we had gotten from what is social media to what should we do to it to, all right, we got it. And that's when the keynote kind of goes away. The demand for that goes away. So I pivoted out of that. And it was just luck and timing and a little bit of decision making to get to that point to where I went towards disruption. So I was looking at, first of all, it was topic based, because then what happens with bureaus though, it's interesting because Jay's always been like that. He always, his main business has never been bureau referrals, which because he's also not exclusive. So I went exclusive with Kepler Speakers, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And I didn't do it to get gigs though. I did it because I saw what was coming for my business. I researched the speaking business nonstop, and you look at trends, and I knew, since I'm Canadian, at the time 5 years ago, my business was 50-50 Canada US, and then it was split again in both countries, 50-50 bureau and direct. And what I was noticing though was Canada has kind of a soft slash hard cap on speaking fees. Once you get to about 15 grand for a keynote, you're almost priced out of the marketplace, just because of the budgets here and the size. We're 10% of the size of the states, and I always say 10% of the size and 1% of the budget. And so I knew I needed to make more of a dent in the states and start getting more traction in the US. And uh, the way you get on a bureau's roster is when a client calls and says, hey, do you guys represent Scott Stratton? And they're like, yeah, for sure. We'll find out if he's available for your event. And then they go and they Google who is Scott Stratton, right? Because a lot of bureaus it's just like you just put a name up and anybody can go grab somebody else. In theory, it's like the Wild West
Right.
of this business. And what happened was people kept asking for me at Kepler, and I just started getting gigs and gigs and gigs. And the whole thing, you always have to remember that bureaus work for the clients, not for the speakers. The bureaus represent the events. They
Right.
don't represent us. So we are a commodity, and it's not a negative thing. It's a realistic thing. We are a commodity, we are interchangeable, and we're not that special. And it took me a long time to realize, and so what happens is then you get into a silo with them. So I came into Kepler as the $15,000 kind of marketing speaker, and so I just it's the slot in. So I just get slotted in. So this year they have their resident marketing person, and the event wants somebody next year as well. Well, I get slotted into that. Well, obviously you should take Scott next year if you like Jeff last year, and I got kind of slotted right in there with other speakers. And but they came to me because the clients were asking for it. And again, that rule of me not pitching gigs was the same thing with not pitching bureaus, because you have no leverage. I wasn't
None.
going to pitch a publisher, because if you go to a publisher, I used to be in the music business, and how you get your demo listened to is not by sending your demo in. It's just a garbage can full of, back in the day, of cassettes and CDs that nobody listened to. It was referrals. the buzz about it. It was like in the music business, lawyers get most of the record deals still today. By so if you want a record deal, find a good entertainment lawyer, right? And so when it comes to gigs, the whole thing was you have to be able to create an interest. What does that? Books can do that. And then you do talks and books. But then what happens if your talk is a breakout style or a lunch and learn style versus a keynote? With MCs, it's a little different because MCs are, it's almost like you almost have, you really have to trust an MC even more
Sure.
and your keynote because they are the backbone of your event. You can get over one mediocre talk, but if you have a mediocre MC, it sucks the air out of the room. It kills it. And so what happens is, when you said, we're going to have somebody from accounting do the thing, and it's very funny, but it's also I have realized in this business after 10 years of one thing: when somebody has a unrealistic demand on you as a speaker, or they go with somebody else, what happens is usually it's because based on past experience. So the reason why they hired Jeff from accounting is they actually paid for a pro MC last year, and he was no better.
And he did a yes clap. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So that's the different side of it. So when somebody comes to me and asks me for my PowerPoint 6 months ahead of the gig, and I used to go back and like, are you kidding me? Like it's so stupid. And I'm like, I'm not sending it. Or they want a really early rehearsal time, like a sound check, like at 6 in the morning, and I'm speaking at 2 p.m. And I used to just go off about that, never to the client. I would just go off to Karen, and I apologize to her all the time about that. But as my assistant, it's part of her job. But I'm like, I can't believe in this and this. And I realized, like, when they would make these unrealistic demands, I would give an unrealistic answer back to Karen, and then she would have to be the messenger. And I realized that was cowardly. That me saying no to stuff because I didn't have to get the fallout from the person was
Right.
cowardly of me. And I didn't want to ask Karen to say or do anything that I wouldn't do in the, right to the client's face. And I realized I'm also not a valuable speaker that way because speaking is only part of it. It's also how you behave before and leading up to and at the event. And I always thought two things because I preach this on stage. Are you the best business to do business with? Do you have the best products and you have the best service? And I realized I thought I had the best product. I'm very confident in my speaking skills, but am I the best service? Do I serve the clients best before the event? And I realized the answer was no. And if I was the best speaker and the best to work with, I could be unstoppable. And I realized it was a tough pill to swallow. I realized I wasn't. And I realized those unrealistic demands was the reason why there's a 6 a.m. sound check was 2 years ago. They made the sound check a half hour before the person's keynote, and they realized they weren't even at the hotel or they hadn't checked in or something. So the sound check turns into an attendance check sometimes. And so I started reframing all those things. So I started reframing stuff when people would come to me at an event. Like I get cornered and they'd be like, "Oh, you should come to our company. How much is it?" And I don't want to say I hate stating the price because it's ridiculous and I'm not uncomfortable doing it. Plus, it's not a good way to negotiate on the side of a stage with other people around you.
Right.
A gig. And I would say the price, I would say 20 grand or 25 grand. And they would say, "Oh, I just have, we don't do that," or we don't have the budget. And what it is it's not them being cheap or like, oh, the speaker last year was $500. It's not them being cheap because they've been given the budget and their budget is $500. And they've really been trying to do these sessions to help the employees. And I realize they're reaching out that I can help them. And although I can't do it because I'm not scalable, my calendar can fill up and I don't want to do more than 60 or so a year, that it's gracious for me to be able to thank them for the opportunity instead of being bitter about it.
Right.
And the problem is our business is it's a very hang your shingle, now you're a speaker business, right? There's no real thing to say. You don't have to go and qualify to be one. You're a speaker because you opened your mouth. And so our competition is people like me who do it for a living and solely speak for a living and are fairly much firm on fees because it's all I do and I'm not scalable. We have hybrid speakers who will speak and get paid or speak and not get paid because they're on behalf of a brand and part of their job is awareness of their brand and speaking at events.
Right.
And then there's speakers who don't need to get paid at all up front because they sell at the back of the room or they sell consulting or they're doing it for their agency. So their back end is not 10,000 or their speaking fee isn't 10 grand. It's free, but they'll make 100 grand from consulting contracts. And then there's people who are learning and they're getting reps in. And I used to get really mad at all the other angles, except unless you're a professional speaker. And now I don't because it's not my right to get a gig. It's not my right to have a slot. I have to make myself so loud and so out there. and market myself in a way as a speaker that it's no choice, but we want Scott. And that's where you create that demand where it's so every gig I do, you get film from it, you'd cut it, and that millennial clip that you ran upon on YouTube, that was all on purpose. That was all, hey, can I make content? And the nice thing about being a speaker is our job is content.
Right.
When we speak, it's content, and the advantage is I can do this. I can go on a podcast, and I know how to talk because it's what I do. So we should be the easiest people to market, and yet we get in our own heads in speaking, and we don't do it very well. And so that you lead to where we are today, which is a bunch of Instagram speakers quoting themselves on a picture of themselves with their name and themselves, thinking a quote is what's going to market them. And I have a phrase which is words aren't quotes. Just because you said it doesn't mean it's worthwhile quoting. And a quote is very, very basic. Somebody else quotes you. That's what a quote is. So if it's good enough for somebody else to quote, awesome. Share it and somebody put it into a quote. But I have a real problem with speakers who just say, this is how I'm marketing. It's myself and a quote of me. And it's just vanity.
Right.
Wow, that was a lot, by the way.
It was
a lot I just said. I'm sorry.
Gary Vee started that trend, but everyone is not Gary. So
Gary's quotable. I love Gary.
Right. He's the best.
I absolutely adore Gary from day one. I've got to chat a few times. We talk on email sometimes, and he's just the real deal.
He is.
And people think it's a front or a brand. And Gary is the number one definition for me. And people use me a lot for saying a personal brand is authentic, and they show up like I wear jeans on stage and my tattoos and my beard. And I'm like, no, that's just me. And Gary is the number one of that.
Right.
Because that is how he is.
Sure.
He's intense. He's passionate as hell. And just sometimes the camera's on.
Right.
There's no more authentic person. You don't have to agree with the hustle side of things and what he does. And it doesn't matter about that. But I really take exception to people who call him fake or this, because he's not. He is a good dude.
I could not agree with you more. And I've had the privilege of spending some good time with him over the past 10 years, and very, very engaging and very, very humble in his conversation, which is
very
not
much
your,
so.
it's not your.
And the problem is people see that and they're like, oh, I just have to say a quote that sounds good as inspiration. I'm like, no, that's Gary talking.
Right.
And his team looks at it and says, this is really quotable. And they put it out. And then the proof's in the pudding because his crap gets shared and liked. And I read the comments on it and it's resonating. And that's the point, though. That's
sure.
Marketing is about resonating.
Sure. Yeah. Staying top of mind.
Exactly. And people see that and they're like, oh, that's all I have. I just have to do that. And this is when you know you've lost, when you hear the word just, because you belittle somebody's effort and work and skill and intelligence. When like, oh, they just did that. And people talk about when I did my Unbooked tour in 2010. They're like, oh, so you just tweeted and there you go. You're like, yeah.
Just tweeted. Yeah. So you said you never liked to pitch deals, and you'll probably never have to do that again, speaking gigs, etc. I didn't know how else to get myself out there. I mean, right. I was already building my brand, but as an MC, I had a guy give me a shot back in 2013 for a conference called Social Fresh that they did on the West Coast and the East Coast, social media conference. And I went as a normal, just blogger attendee there to create content for you. And I had the opportunity to meet the people who put it on, a guy named Jason Keith, good dude. And after
I know Jason very well. He's a wonderful, wonderful human.
Okay, cool. So
I know the conference. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So we were in Tampa, and he asked what I thought. He's like, "Can you give me some feedback?" And I said, "Sure." I said, by the first day, by lunchtime, I wanted to punch myself in the face due to the lack of energy. And he got, he's an introvert, put my opposite, right? So he's looking at me like I got 10 heads and boogers. He's got his hand on his chin, kind of folded arms. Like, I am so mad I let this guy in the door. Anyway, he goes, all right, he goes, so what's your solution? And this guy had never done this in my entire life. I saw it. I knew it. I felt it. I'd done speaking, and I'm like, I could crush it as the MC. I said, let me put on an orange bow tie, give me the microphone, and let me rock the stage in San Diego. And he goes, interesting. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. I'm like, all right, cool. I went home, didn't even think anything of it. He hit me up 3 months later. He goes, you know what? I've thought about it. Let's do it. I can't pay you, but I can get you out here. I said, okay, no, listen, Jason, just make sure it doesn't cost me money. So that was where I got my start, and I did that for, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. But I met Mari Smith and Brian Solis and Mike Stelzner with Social Media Examiner. I was able to interview these people, and all these people going, "Man, you're great on stage." And I'm like, "Hold on, Mari, can I get that on camera?" And I was able to develop a reel.
Yeah.
So then I had something to work with. So I would go around and I would constantly just cold. I called it cold emailing. Need an MC. Need an MC. Anytime there was an event site. And I would just canvas it, and I'd come up empty. I'd get a call here and there randomly and get a gig, 3-4 gigs a year, nothing crazy. And I saw an ad for a conference called Traffic and Conversions on Twitter. And it was a really nice looking ad. Digital marketer, looks like a cool company. So I followed digital marketer, and then Twitter always tells you who else to follow. Like, you should follow this guy named Ryan Dice. And I'm like, oh, he's the founder. Great guy to follow. Let me follow him. Let me just shoot him a quick tweet and be like, hey, Ryan, you need a guy in a bow tie to rock your stage for Traffic and Conversions. And he responds back immediately. He's like, dude, your timing could not have been better. Can you DM me your information? And I'm like, no problem. So I DM him. I'm on the phone with him the next morning. He's taking his kid to school. I got no idea who Ryan Dice is. And he said, listen, I'm trying to transition out of this role as like the face of the company and being the MC. Like, I'm there to teach, but I can't be there multiple times. We brought an MC in last year. People wanted to stab themselves in the neck. It was a bad experience. So we're looking for somebody that's qualified. You and I have one friend in common, a guy named Tim Hayden, who I met at Social Fresh, and he said, let's do it. And he said, how much is it? And I said, it's $2,500 plus travel a day, plus travel and expenses. And he goes, okay, done. I'll get you in touch with my team, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple months. And I literally hung up the phone, and I stood there, and I thought, holy shit, I did it. We're on to something here. Traffic and Conversions was great to me. I did it for probably 3 or 4 years, and now they're just, 10,000 people and 19 stages, and it's just an absolute marketing just monster. So we kind of grew out of each other, which was cool. They were looking for something new and fresh. I think I got replaced by a DJ, which is totally cool. Totally cool. But I was able to, again, rinse and repeat again with, Ryan calls me a tornado of enthusiasm. So being able to interact, and then guys like Gary coming in as the keynote, and then being able to catch up with them in the green room, like everything coming full circle, So
right,
and that was great. And I did get booked. You're right. If you want to speak, you want to be on stage, be on stage, because that's how more gigs. And the ripple effect still happens for years now. Hey, I saw you at Traffic and Conversions. We need a podcast, or our next event's coming up. But it was never enough. So I found myself constantly, and I still kind of do. I've scaled back a little bit and said, okay, what do I really want to do with this MC thing? Because, and this is what I want to close out with. I had a really gnarly experience late last year at a gig, and I was actually filling in for someone. And I don't know if you've ever filled in for someone, but usually that there's a bar that I failed to recognize going into it, which was, I'm there to not only do what I do, but I'm like, do what they do, like that I normally do, because I'm here to fill in. And the client was so sold out on the old MC, and it was a constant comparison for 4 days. Well, Jim does it like this, and Jim does it like that, and Jim. I finally said, listen, I'm gonna either punch this guy in the throat, or I'm gonna have to tell him, listen, I'm not fucking Jim, dude. I don't know what to tell you, right? So he got to a point where he just would. I got my head pounded in for 4 straight days. And as an MC, you're not a speaker. You're not there to just 45 minutes, answer some questions, and you can be at the pool for the afternoon. Like, you're bell to bell. And I walked away from that gig, and I came back home, Scott, and I thought, do I really want to do this? Because it's a lot of work. The money's great, but the emotional toll that it took by working with somebody that I'm not aligned with. So I chatted with a few people that I trust and their opinion. And I told them the story about it. And the common denominator of the feedback that I got was, did you meet and prepare with the client, not the client's team? Like, did you talk to the client, connect with the client, have a conversation with them? And the answer was no. I just dealt with their team. So I showed up cold and met them there, and we were completely just oil and water and not aligned at all. So the lesson was, make sure you're aligned with the client regardless of what the budget is going into it. Because, man, I don't know if you've ever been to a bad gig before, but it really does. It puts a toll on your soul.
It rocks your world.
Yeah.
It rocks your world. And I remember reading really early on a book called Money Talks, which was about the professional speaking business by Alan Weiss. And I don't think it's called that now, but it's famous. It still holds true. And I was reading the book, and one of the things it said in it was, no matter how good you are, you're going to bomb.
Yep.
And I'm like, as if. And he's like, and if you bomb, then it's not your fault. There's a million reasons why you could. And if you bomb and it's not your fault, then you just do what you do, and then you walk out with your head held high and you cash the check. If it's your fault because of you're hungover, or you did this, or
Right.
you didn't do it right, you give the check back. That was the two options, and so and then I finally bombed, and I'm like, oh, okay, there it is, and you
Yeah.
just and sometimes I always know between mm, takes me I always say between 30 seconds and 5 minutes to win over the audience, and sometimes it's 5 seconds, and you just walk out and it's just killer, and then sometimes you're like, all right, it's one of those. And it's amazing. And like about the pre-call, like so doing a call beforehand, I used to hate those, hate them. I don't like being on the phone. I don't because what happens is the calls would be always be the same. Hey, we saw you at this event. You were great. You're coming to ours, but our audience is different. Everyone would say that, and I'm like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, are they humans? If they're humans, I know how to do this, and I would be bitter about it. And imagine a guy being bitter, getting paid 5 figures for an hour about having to go on a call for 20 minutes. But that was me, and I'm like, I can't. And they're always like this, and they'd always end at the end. They're like, oh, one more thing. We know you get really passionate, and I'm like, yeah. I know. I won't swear on stage. I know. Like, and that was it. And then you have this, and now it's like, one more thing. Please don't talk politics on stage. Like it's gone from vulgarity to politics is the big taboo on stage.
Is there anything
And then,
else?
but here's the thing. So until I almost screwed it all up. So we had one client. We didn't do a pre-call. They didn't ask for one of the few ones that didn't ask for it. It's one of those things you just touch base and they're like, here's my concerns. And I just add notes. I've reframed how I look at it. But I had one and it was for it was credit unions. And one of the things about industry is one of the ways to get known in an industry is to focus on a vertical and just do everything you can in that vertical. You mean you write articles for their newsletter, for their magazine. They're dying for content always. And if you look up if you know Andrew Davis is a phenomenal speaker and he's got a phenomenal system for it. They're actually coming out with a book soon called I think the referable speech. I think it's going to be called that. But this is exactly what he's talking about. What you're looking at too is how you get known, and because a vertical is much easier, like a specific industry. But what happens was I had done 7 or 8 talks in the credit union industry, like over an 18-month span. You speak at the national meeting, and all the regional ones want you to come afterwards, versus doing it the other way around. And so I'm getting cocky now. I don't need help being cocky. It's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And I think when you're stepping on stage, you have to believe that you're the best choice for that stage. And I get there and I go do the sound check. And of course, I'm bitching about the sound check too. It's like one microphone. Why the hell am I even doing a sound check? I'm not Michael Bublé. I don't have 27 instruments behind me. It's a lav. And so I showed up for the sound check, left the lav on, and then I was going to go back to my room for like 2 hours until I had to be back down for my call time. And I go down in Vegas and I go to the stage, do my sound check. Hey, 1, 2, I'm Scott. Good, thanks. And I'm done. The slides are done, and I'm leaving, and I'm like, oh, hang on a second. One thing has been bugging me about credit unions because one of the things you have to know about credit unions is they don't call their customers, they call them members. And if you want to mess up a credit union gig, talk about banks in a good way, right? They're not banks, they're credit unions, and bankings are the kind of the competition. And so I had really good with credit unions. They're about community. I'm about community. And so I went up to one of the volunteers. I'm like, hey man, I'm walking out and I stop and I pivot and I walk back in. I'm like, I really should get the answer to this question. And I walked up to a volunteer. I'm like, hey, when credit union members go to the credit union, do they say they're going to go do their banking? Or is there another term for it? Because I didn't want to use the term banking because that again is taboo for credit unions. And he just looks at me and goes, I don't understand. I said, "Oh, okay, no. When members go to credit unions, are they banking or is there another term? They're not credit unioning." And he looks at me and he just tilts his head sideways like a puppy and goes, "You know this isn't a credit union event, right? These are credit managers. They manage credit for large brands, extending credit to customers." And I looked at him. I'm like, "Oh yeah, no, I have a credit union event later this week. Sorry, I got the wires crossed. Don't worry. I had a brain fart." And I walk out, and I'm like, "Oh my god!" I nearly got on stage in front of 2,000 people and gave a credit union talk to an industry that has zero to do with credit unions. Zero. And so I realized I should have done the goddamn pre-call.
Yeah.
Right? I should have
Yeah.
they would have explained it because I always ask open-ended questions like tell me about the audience a little more, do this, and they would have went, well, it's credit management, so don't be confused with credit unions. And I nearly blew it. And in my head, I'm like, how long would they have let me go on for? And the answer is probably the entire time.
Got it.
And I would have been up there saying, what's wrong with this audience? Why
Right.
aren't they digging my credit union jokes, my bank jokes? And by the way, there were banks there, and I would have ripped on them as it, with jokes about credit unions versus banks. Dude, I nearly, oh my God. Oh my God. And so I'm sweating right now just talking about it. It was so close to happening.
That I got feedback from. Do you know who Jack Daly is?
No.
Hyper Sales Growth, another keynote speaker. And I met him at an EO conference, entrepreneur organization.
Great organization.
Yeah, to talk for them right when my book came out, and I did a breakout session. Gary was the keynote there, and I went right after him, not as a keynote, but as a breakout session. And Jack decided to attend it. And at these conferences, there's all kinds of parties and dinner, and there's a suite and the whole nine. So I'm up in the suite that evening, and I run into Jack, and he goes, "Were you that guy that gave a social media talk earlier today?" I go, "Sure was. What's your name?" He goes, "That was the worst fucking talk I've ever heard in my entire life." And I said, Jack, I'm thinking, I don't know who this guy is. Like, my knees are knocking, my palms are sweating. It's 1 a.m. We got a few drinks in us. It's, you got a decent, cool, you think you're in the cool kids room, right?
Yeah.
And I go, "Well, can you give me some feedback?" He goes, "Listen, it's 1:00 in the morning. I'm a little fucking drunk and I don't feel like explaining myself." And I said, okay, but I'm just not a kid to just take no for an answer. Like, you came to my talk, you told me that it sucks shit through a straw, but you can't give me any feedback. I don't understand. He goes, "Because I don't fucking have to. That's why." And I thought, all right, cool. So I don't know who this guy is. I'm texting people that I kind of know. I'm texting my publisher. There's a short, older gentleman. I think his name is Jack. He wrote a book. He's got a book with you guys too. Do you know him? Because he just read me for filth. And I think I want to go home early. I literally went back to my room and I was checking flights. I'm like, I got to get the fuck out of here. So I went back to the room again, and I'm like, all right, Jack, can you at least just give me like something? Because I wouldn't let it go. And
of course.
he goes, "I tell you what, I'm not going to tell you a thing tonight because I already told you that I'm not going to talk to you tonight. But my talk is at 9:00 tomorrow morning. As soon as we're done with my talk, I got a couple minutes to give you some feedback and explain why I said what I did." No problem. Went back to my room, sitting there checking flights again. And I said, "Well, I'll decide in the morning." I woke up in the morning. I go, "Listen, are you going to let some guy that you just met defeat you, or are you going to put your bow tie on when you don't have to, go down there and sit in the front row and take diligent notes?" And that's exactly what I did. And we got done with the talk, and he said, "I don't have time to talk to you because people are talking to me and I got to run. But are you going to the Phillies game later on? You need to be in that suite." And I'm thinking, the tickets are $250. And I'm thinking, no, dude, I'm not going to he goes, "You need to be there because that's where you and I are going to have a conversation." And I ended up buying a ticket, threw it on a credit card, ended up in that suite, and we sat down. Completely different aura from Jack. And he said, "Listen, kid, you got something that most people don't have, and you're born with it. You don't develop it. It's called stage presence. In fact, I'm a little envious of it." He goes, "But you got to bring it down just a hair. Like, your energy is great and everything, but you got to know how to take them up and bring them down, and take them up and bring them down. Here's my cell phone number. Let's stay in touch. I live in Southern California. You're going to be just fine, kid. And I appreciate you taking the feedback, coming there and actually showing up in the suite today. It says a lot." But the reason I tell this story is that it forever altered the path of where I was at. First of all, it humbled me. And second of all, Jack's a dear, dear friend to this day now. And feedback is great, but we don't realize it.
Well, and I think there's a problem though, and it's rampant in the speaking industry where it's actually a rare story that you just told, which was unsolicited feedback that helped, because most of the time unsolicited feedback is worth what you paid. And the problem is though, I love feedback. I love people. It betters what you do, and if you don't think you can get better, that's when you truly have lost.
Sure.
But it's context. So where is the feedback coming from? Is it coming from a place of love and trust? And have you asked for it? And if you've asked for it, and I have speakers will come to me and they'll say, "Hey, can you give me feedback on my demo video? It's finished." And I'm like, that question, that statement alone means you don't want feedback. You want praise, because if it's finished, it's not going to be edited. And one of my favorite book titles from a guy named Jim Moran in the 90s, he just did it like tip books. They wouldn't really work now because of the internet, but back then it was like 200 lines of advice that have been gained in business. And I ate these up in college. I love them. And the title of one of them is called Beware of Those Who Ask for Feedback. They're usually looking for praise. And I've always remembered that because
Mm,
I am very, like you, I'm very blunt. I quote, tell it like it is. It doesn't mean we're not being an asshole.
right.
And so I've learned how to frame things a little better, but also I've learned how to ask a qualifying question, meaning, do you want actual feedback, or
Very
are you just wanting
important.
to watch it because I think I'll share it? And then I've had people come back and go, you know what, actually, I was looking for validation, so thank you. And that's good because I will give really honest, because I know this industry very, very well, and I also know how hard this industry is to make a living in, solely in this industry, and it's being sold as an easy way to make a lot of money, and it's not even remotely easy. And the problem at thing like NSA is speakers will just nonstop come up to most speakers and say, "This is what you did wrong," and that's not kind.
No,
That's
not
not
at all.
kind. And the problem is it's also your competition. And so I go to NSA. I try to go every year now, and I didn't before. But I go because I want to weigh down the other side of it, which is the unsolicited feedback givers or the people who are just selling crap speaker systems. And there's some good ones out there, but a lot of them are not. You want to make money in speaking, teach people how to make money speaking. And it's just like real estate, right? It's the same thing. And you just have to be, I really think feedback has to come from kindness. And but the feedback that he gave you is actually something I've worked on for 10 years, where I would come out in my social media sessions and I'm just guns ablazing, right at the start, and I just started changing it, and I looked for a kind of a soft open. And the first story I tell to most audiences is the Joshy Ritz Carlton story, which is a stuffed giraffe that was left at Ritz Carlton. And they did a photo shoot, and he was, at the pool and all that stuff. But one of the original ones that they did this. Now a lot of companies have done it. But the reason I tell it is because it's a calm story. You can't tell it effectively unless I'm doing it calm. I'm a storyteller. That's like really my role in life.
Sure.
But by the time I hit the middle with that millennial rant, which I'm actually on millennial side when I flip it on them, but is full Scott. Like halfway through, I am full volume Scott, but I start with a story starting where I just gradually grow it, and it's a very useful piece of information. The problem is, you know, you could have taken that obviously very badly, in the wrong way, and still hated the guy today. And I'm glad that worked out. It's a very risky thing. So I just don't give feedback unless I'm asked for it, and then I confirm that it's what they want.
Well, I learned that through a personal development course
Yeah.
that I took a few years back. And they said, if you walk up to somebody and go, "Hey, your hair looks like shit," just being honest, like, no, you're just being an asshole.
Yeah, you're just being a dick. Yeah.
There's the dogs. It must be towards the end of the show. So one more NSA story. They attempted, right, of 2015, I think it was, to rebrand the entire organization and not get any feedback from a lot of the members that have been members since God spoke to Moses.
Platform. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, platform. I loved it. I'm thinking this is great. Yeah, NSA, that logo. Yeah, we need a little refresher. So they announced it on like the last day of the conference. They handed all kinds of swag and luggage tags. I remember distinctly, they were blue because I got one of these. Are great here, and I'm fired up about the rebranding. I'm kind of the new guy. I'm friends with Scott McCain now, and I'm doing the damn thing here at NSA. The whole nine. And I mean, the membership is just having the meltdown of all meltdowns. I'm losing their noodles. So I get back home. The conference is like 7 days long. My goodness. Anyway, I finally get home after like a week at NSA, and it's a Thursday, and I post in the group, "Throwback Thursday, too soon." And when I say that the meltdown continued, I'll never forget. My late friend, you probably know him too, Sean Stevenson, commented and said, "Well, there's a great way to never get a CSP." But that was
I wrote my most read blog post I've ever written on marketing.com was me ripping speaking associations. It was when CAPS, the Canadian version of speaking association, I had applied to speak because they were like, it's called Engage, and this is back when on marketing was first out, was going gangbusters. And so I'm like, yeah, and it was the only time I ever went to go pitch to speak. I'm like, I want to give back a bit. It's already blown up. I've learned a lot from that day on book tour. Maybe I can give back to not only speakers but Canadian speakers. And I went to submit, and a friend of mine said, you should go submit. talk. It's perfect. And I'm like, okay. And I went and I filled it all out and wrote the bullshit description and all that, and got to the very end and said, before you click submit, you have to buy a conference pass. And I'm like, oh, hell no. And I wrote a blistering blog post about the very industry that's supposed to protect fee integrity is asking us not only to speak for free, but to pay to speak, and flights and hotels and all this stuff. And it blew up. You should go read the comments, man. They're still salty in there.
Oh,
and,
I definitely am.
and there's like, it should be an honor to be selected to speak to your peers. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you should giving back. And I'm like, I never took. I wasn't a member of these associations. And like, I'm like, what do I owe? And I'm like, I want to help, but I'm not going into debt to help. And a very, very quick aside about Scott McCain. Because I had the same experience with Scott way back too. And I went to my first NSA meeting, and I was still kind of on the up climb in the business. And I saw him in a coffee shop, and I'm like, hey, you're Scott McCain. He had no idea who I was. And he sat there with me for like an hour.
Yeah.
Talked about speaking. He's one of the godfathers of the business.
Sure.
And he's one of my closest friends now. And it was the kindness type of thing where you just don't forget that.
Nope.
And I was wonderfully honored 2 years ago to be put into the Speaking Hall of Fame. And I almost turned it down, which would have been very funny. I almost turned it down twice. Once when they said you got in, and then once I almost did it during my acceptance speech, which would have been epic. But it's also a very big slap in the face to your peers. But the reason I was going to turn it down was because I always think a Hall of Fame induction is when your career's done.
Right.
And I was just going to lean into the microphone and say, I'm just getting started, and drop the mic and walked off the stage. But Scott was the person who inducted me. So he was the one who gave the intro. And I never will forget. And I actually told that story on stage during my acceptance speech about him, that kindness isn't a tactic. It's not a brand. It's who you are. And people, and you can be at any level and you can still be kind.
He's a good guy. Always got time for another, just like same cut from the same thread as Jay Bear.
Exactly.
He's got great hair too. Great hair, great glasses.
And the voice of Jesus and Fergie.
You are not, Jack Nicholson's a fan of the show. I told him that I've got some feedback for him. You know what he told me?
I eat breakfast 300 yards from 4,000 Cubans who are trained to kill me, so don't think for 1 second that you can come down here, flash a badge, and make me nervous.
All right, Jack, it's a little temperamental there. Well, Scott, dude, it's so great to connect with you, man. I've been following you for quite some time. If you told me you were following me 10 years ago, I would have called the police, but it's pretty common these days. Congrats on everything that you've done. And most important, Scott, congrats on doing shit that matters. You and Alison are leaving this place better than you found it. And you found a real groove there with her doing the writing and you doing the speaking, and you guys continuing to just be the voice of the people, if you will, pertaining to what you guys are doing there. I look forward to meeting you in person one day, sharing the stage with you, etc. Come back to the show sometime, will you?
Hey, man, you need me on this show. You want me on this show. And I didn't order the code red.
You can't handle the truth. Well, obviously I can't.
You can't handle the lectern.
Hey, thanks again, man. And we'll definitely be chatting soon.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Beyond the Story podcast. Be sure to appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, make sure you're subscribed to the show. This way you'll get updates as new episodes become available. If you feel so inclined, please leave us a review. Be sure to appreciate it. Signing off from the podcast, LaunchLab.com studios. We'll talk to you next time.